Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Dave Sauve, Stantec's Innovation Leader for our Infrastructure Group, and I'd like to welcome you all to the first webinar in our new Stantec Infrastructure webinar series. At Stantec, we think of infrastructure as a great enabler, and infrastructure innovations have gotten us where we are today and can lay the foundation for better communities in the future. And that would include a future better focused on equity, livability, and sustainability. This series is going to feature timely topics and trends that we see impacting our industry, particularly related to themes such as innovation, design, mobility, and planning. Our Stantec thought leaders will be presenting educational content in hopes of sharing information and getting some conversations going. At today's webinar, we're going to discuss the relationship between infrastructure and equity and how we can all rethink our approach to projects and create meaningful shifts in our work. So now I'd like to introduce our two speakers. First, we have Ramandeep Josen, who's a senior asset management specialist based in Stantec's Burlington, Massachusetts office. As a civil engineer and urban planner, he assists municipalities with understanding their infrastructure works, and his specialty is applying prioritization algorithms to capital planning and using these insights to create a space for the equitable growth and prosperity of communities. And we also have Alison LaFleur, who is a senior planner based in Stantec's Boston office and who specializes in leading the planning, design, and engagement of community projects. She's worked with gateway cities all across the United States, creating new vitality and setting the stage for an equitable future. So over to Raman and Alison.
Sorry, my mute button didn't work. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. On behalf of Raman and myself, we wanted to thank you for joining us and signing up to have this conversation. We know that this is a complicated topic and it can be difficult to discuss, but we really, truly appreciate your openness and willingness to begin or continue thinking about these issues. It's very important to us that this session is welcoming and judgment-free. We'll start with a brief overview, to then go into our case study, then talk about how you can do this work, start doing this work, continue doing this work, improve your work, and learn more. So we'll start with an overview of some of the key terms. We know that there are an awful lot of different terms and phrases in the space. We often use them interchangeably, and sometimes that's okay, but sometimes they also have their separate and related definitions. So of course, we're here to talk about equity, and that will be at the heart of our discussion today. Since we often use many of these words interchangeably, we really wanted to start by getting on the same page with everyone today to demystify some of these words and highlight some of the key differences. As we've mentioned, and you can see, it's a really complicated, messy web of words we use to talk about equity, inclusion, diversity, environmental justice, social justice, inclusion, I think I already said inclusion, sorry, belonging, openness, privilege, access, opportunity. Each of these terms is related, but also separate and distinct. And along with making this a welcoming and judgmental space, we really want to acknowledge and make clear that nobody knows it all, right? This is a complete process, and no matter how long you work in this space, live in our world, you know, this web will never be entirely untangled. It's a process of constant learning and ever-evolving thought. We've listed some of our keywords here, but there are many, many more. We're not going to discuss each of the terms here today, but we invite you to keep coming back to these phrases and terms to help gauge your knowledge. Maybe the definitions will change for you over time. Maybe you recognize a new word. Maybe you recognize a new use. Maybe you're familiar with some. Maybe you're not familiar with any. That's great. Wherever you are, keep learning and exploring, but don't expect to wake up one day and think, yeah, mission accomplished. I've got this web completely untangled. There are always new nuances and words to learn. So we'll talk in detail about some of these few key terms. Oops, that went too far. Sorry, I think I've got a bit of a lag. I'm sorry, everyone. So we want to talk about identifying some of these issues with a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Everyone thinks differently, so we wanted to provide a few different visual cues to help you figure out the best way for you to think about these terms, their differences and relationships. For a lot of us, we think about it as a continuum. Other times it's a Venn diagram. I think interchangeably, depending on what I'm doing. I'll think about it and explain it to clients and partners in different ways. We'll start on this page with diversity. It's really just all the things that make us different from others. It's the starting point for all these conversations. If everyone was the same and experienced the world in the same way, we would end the conversation there. There wouldn't be any need for any of the rest of the work we do. But we all know that communities, people, places, and organizations are complicated and made up of lots of different people. That's what makes it sometimes challenging, but that's also what makes it really interesting and enriches our worlds, our lives. But when we pretend we don't have those differences, when we ignore that diversity, that's when we're leaving a big part of who we are and who people are and who our communities are and what everyone can bring to the table. So equity and equality are probably the two terms that are most often used interchangeably, but there are some really important differences between the two. From a very young age, I think we innately are concerned with fairness, right? I think this is just part of our nature. For example, I have 2 dogs. If I have 6 treats and everyone gets 3, we're good. If I, for whatever reason, I'm not paying attention and give 4 to one and 2 to the other, you bet my first dog's gonna be pretty upset. Honestly, the same thing happens when I hang out with my young nieces and nephews. Really early, we figure out what's fair and what's not fair. That's the top piece of this slide, equality. Or at least we think we've figured out that fairness, right? When we're young, when we're dealing in simple situations, fairness sometimes is all about sameness, but it's not always. And in our world, it's often not that simple. So that's where the second line of the cartoon comes from, equity. Equity is recognizing that not everyone will benefit from the same support, services, programs, policies, etc. And then we tailor our treatment. In the cartoon, not everyone's able to ride the adult bicycle, and there are any number of reasons that this one particular bicycle may not work, right? Maybe you're in a wheelchair, maybe you're too tall, maybe you're too small, maybe you don't have the balance, maybe you've never learned, but we've given everyone the same bicycle when we're talking about equality. The next step here is equity, which is providing the right bicycle to the right rider. It's ensuring that everyone has what they need and able to ride the bicycle. Moving beyond equity onto the continuum or into the intersection of the Venn diagram is where justice lives. There are lots of different definitions of justice. Many apply to the topics we're discussing, but for me, really, I think justice is thinking about what's beyond providing people the support they need. Are we able to change the circumstances to give people opportunity to succeed without needing individualized supports, right? In this cartoon, it's looking at the ways we can remove the fence to give everyone access to the view. Of course, it's never that simple, and we have far more barriers than just a simple picket fence, but this is what we're striving for. The key takeaway here is that equality does not equal equity, does not equal justice. Even though we often use these terms interchangeably, they're related, but they're separate and different. And we need to hone our language. And in certain circumstances, in most circumstances in this space, we need to be clear about what we're talking about and when. So today we're focusing on equity. We can't really talk about equity without talking about inequity. Inequity and equity are the same, or two sides of the same coin. Are we looking at how late the bus is or how on time it is? At the end of the day, we're measuring the same thing, just in the inverse. We can't really talk about it without talking about the other. Sometimes it's easier, oftentimes it's easier to find the inequity or to start by talking about and measuring inequity than to talk about equity, right? The absence of something is sometimes easier to measure or see in our real world than its presence. And when we're talking about what we can do better, it's easier to start with a place of inequity. Even though we're solving the same problem, we just look at it the opposite way. And so when we're talking about equity in this space, we're talking about two key attributes that are measurable, right? We want to be able to measure it because we want to be able to say, objectively, how are we doing here? So we need to have disproportional differences and institutionalized differences. So the program, service, policy, et cetera, either benefits or harms different groups disproportionately, and that different impact is then baked into that program or policy. So what does this all look like in real life, and why does it matter? Ramandeep's going to take us through a really exciting case study looking at just that.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ramandeep Josen, and I'm I'm going to echo a lot of what Allison said earlier, where we are just excited and blessed, to have this platform to talk about something that we care about so passionately. And so, my goal for the next little bit is going to be talking about what the relationship is with equity and government services. And I'm going to start off with a little bit of a quiz for you all. And it's going to be a multiple choice quiz, so don't be too stressed out, okay? And it's going to be this very question is, what is the relationship between the quality of services that people experience and the trust that they have in government? Okay, in this case, the services that we're talking about are roads, water, and waste. And so, A, do you believe that people trust government the same regardless of the quality of services that they're experiencing? Do you, B, believe that people trust government more when they're experiencing worse services? Or C, do you believe that people trust government less when they experience worse services? I'm going to give you like 10 seconds to try to get the answer for this, and we will go from there. All right, well, hopefully your answer was C, and the fact that there is a direct correlation between the trust that people have in government and then the services that they experience, the service quality that they experience. And, this is kind of a no duh, thing, that's something we all subconsciously know. This isn't something that you look at and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It makes complete sense. But what we sometimes don't understand is what the impact of this has from a much bigger scale. And so the reason I wanted to, have this little interactive quiz in the beginning is because I'm going to come back and reference this later on, and you'll understand why this may have a bigger impact than you actually originally thought. So now we're going to go into a case study. A case study on a project that I've been working on with the city of Boston for upwards of 6 years now. And this has been a project that is all about acknowledging inequality and starting to overcome it. And like Allison said earlier, it's not, you never achieve it. You always are working towards building it more and more and more and more and more. And so before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about my role with the city. I'm an asset management engineer, and I help the city when it comes to understanding their surface infrastructure needs, right? So, whether it's their pavements, their sidewalks, their ramps, like what are the conditions of these assets? Where are they? How much money should we be spending on them? And further, how should we prioritize the allocation towards investing in this infrastructure? And so I'm going to start off by painting you a picture where I was sitting in the office with the chief engineer at the time, talking sidewalks, getting ready for a budget meeting, and ran some deterioration modeling based on conditions that we had collected, and said, hey, well, here's your sidewalk network, and let's go over some metrics. You currently own around 1,600 centerline miles of sidewalk. Running some numbers, you have about $500 million worth of repair backlog, yet you only have $11 million to spend annually. And now I know there's a lot of municipalities on this call, or people that work in municipalities, and this is not going to be anything surprising. Everybody is in the same situation. Nobody's going to tell me that they are properly funded. And so everyone's in this boat. And, like many municipalities and cities around the world, the city kind of turned to a citizen request platform, a 311 platform, to kind of help dictate out of that $11 million where we should be repairing sidewalks. And this had been something that the city had been doing for generations and generations and generations. And similarly, you may be in that same situation. But it wasn't until the end of 2015 where the city engineers invested in creating this new smartphone app, this new glamorous smartphone app that made making a request very, very simple and easy. And what this led to was a unsustainable number of requests coming in. So previously, people had to, call in and make a service request, and you didn't have that many requests coming in. But ever since this smartphone app came out, the number of requests skyrocketed. And not only did this number of requests that came in skyrocket, but when we looked at the data for after the requests were closed, there was a significant spike in dissatisfaction with the overall timeliness, responsiveness, and experience that people were having with this system. And so when we looked at this, and in talking to the chief engineer, we were like, this system is broken. This, we can't look at this anymore and say it's okay. And, in reality, looking back, the quick fix to this would have been, let's throw more money at it. We have way more requests than we can handle. We need way more resources. We need more contractors. We need more help. But, we paused. We took a second to say, let's not be too reactive, and let's ask one simple question. And that one simple question led to a rabbit hole that, was going to be the next like 15 slides. And that question was, are the requests that we're getting correlating with the poor condition sidewalks? And better yet, who are making these requests? Okay. And so to answer that, we said, well, let's make some heat maps. So the first heat map we made was, well, where are we getting these requests from? And when we mapped the requests out, we saw that, hey, a significant number of these requests are really coming from a small geographical part of the city, which, okay, we can live with. But then when we looked at the sidewalk conditions, we saw, there isn't really a correlation between where we're getting these requests and where the worst condition sidewalks are in the city. And this is when the red flags started going off, where we started realizing, we might be barking down the wrong tree here. And, then just for giggles, we created a third heat map, which was the highest per capita income in the city. And what we ended up seeing was that there was a direct correlation between where the requests were coming from and the highest per capita income, but there was really not much of a correlation with the problem at hand, which was fixing the sidewalk repairs and fixing the poor condition sidewalk repairs. And at this point, we really realized, we really have to start investigating a little deeper. And in doing so, we started investigating the 311 data a little more. And what we started seeing is a lot of issues. One was when we looked at race, there were significantly higher requests coming from whiter census block groups. And I want to let the record show that the y-axis in this graph is in log scale. So this is like a steep slope. And further than when we looked at income, and we saw a steeper slope where the more wealthy a census block group was, the even more requests were coming in. And so I'm going to pause right now, and I want all of you to think back at the very first slide, the little interactive quiz I asked you to do. And at that point, we made this idea and this correlation of, service quality that people are experiencing with trust in government. And when we look at something like this, a policy like this, which is when you're making a service request, when you are a citizen making a request, there is innately some trust required that when I make this request, whoever's on the other end of that is going to do something about it. And so when you look at that first slide I talk about, and you realize that if I'm in a place that has poor condition everything, and I don't trust necessarily the government as much, and I'm creating a policy that depends on trust, isn't that broken? Isn't there something wrong with that picture? And so, as we were going down this, analysis and going through these things, it kind of all was making sense. And, that's why I started off with that slide, because we all subconsciously know that, but when we start looking at the policies we have in place, they don't necessarily, we don't necessarily make these connections. But then when you look at the data, it's kind of obvious. So, sorry, I just needed to pause because I wanted to interject myself to go back to the beginning. So, once we were at this point and we realized that the 311 system was kind of broken, we started questioning ourselves as to why we got and how we got to this point. And the question we asked ourselves was, well, why have we never assessed impact the way we should assess impact, right? We knew we were spending $11 million annually. We knew approximately this resulted in 650,000 square feet of sidewalks being repaired. But then when it came to the impact, what was it? What were we chasing? What were we accomplishing? And what should we be chasing? And what should we be accomplishing? Was something that we never thought about because we had such a reactive system. And so, by taking a step back, we asked ourselves, well, what should the impact be? And, we went to the whiteboard, we had a bunch of things, and we came up with two primary sources of impact that we want to talk about. One was, well, these are sidewalk repairs. Are we in fact making our sidewalk network more accessible and more traversable? And two, who are we impacting with these repairs? And after looking at what we just saw, are we helping people in need? And those are the two impacts that we really wanted to hone in on. And so we investigated. And so the first thing I want to talk about is the idea of the network accessibility impact. And so before I get too far into it, I'm going to break down to you how the city quantifies their sidewalk condition categories. And so city engineers and static engineers went out and we assessed every sidewalk block. And if less than 20% of the sidewalk block was damaged, it was considered to be in good condition. If between 20 and 50% of the sidewalk was damaged, it was considered to be fair. And if more than half of the sidewalk was damaged, it was considered to be poor. And so, we had this baseline, but in order to understand this idea of impact, we kind of had to revamp and reorder our work order management and asset management systems to start tracking a few more things. And so what we did, we started tracking the exact amount of sidewalk we were repairing on each given sidewalk block to see, did we in fact improve the conditions of these sidewalks? And what we found was, unfortunately, not. We first looked at, we have poor condition. We had 15.3% of sidewalks that were previously in poor condition and beforehand. And after we made the repair, they were left in poor condition, looking something like this. And so essentially what we had was, so many repair requests that we couldn't really go and make a whole sidewalk block accessible. So we were just fixing one trip hazard in a block of 50 trip hazards. And, are we being impactful to that sidewalk block? Is, somebody can now go 5 extra feet, but then get stuck there. Like, what was the actual impact? And when we looked at, a success measure, we only turned 15.7% of the previously poor or fair condition sidewalks into good condition, which isn't that great. And nearly 45% of the sidewalks that we were doing repairs on were already in good condition. And like, we should have been shocked by that. We should have been like half of the, but we weren't, because you looked at the same heat maps I looked at, and there was no correlation. We knew that there was some misguiding going on with these requests. And so, this really was a good indication. And, when we started off, those heat maps were a very macro level view. And we really had to create a system to get to this micro level understanding of what the actual impact was. To really understand the shortcomings of this process. And the second part was, who are we impacting? And are we impacting the people in need, right? Those in need. And, in order to do this, we created a cumulative social vulnerability index. And this social vulnerability index consisted of 7 key metrics. We looked at low income, we looked at minority population, high school less educated, linguistically isolated, children aged less than 5, seniors aged greater than 64, and the disability population. And we meshed those 7 metrics together to create what we call a cumulative social vulnerability index. And here is like a heat map of that, broken down by census block, where the red blocks you see are the most socially vulnerable and the green are the least socially vulnerable. And so then what we did is we plotted all of our repairs that we made, and we compared how many of them were in the most socially vulnerable regions of the city, which we consider to be the orange and red blocks, and found only 1.1% of the repairs we were making were in those most socially vulnerable regions of the city. And so, we created these 2, impact criteria, and when we went through them, we weren't making our sidewalks more accessible or more traversable, nor were we helping people in need. And we realized that the system was broken. And at this point, we got the buy-in from everyone in the city that we needed to move on, and we needed to find something better. We need to re-strategize how we were repairing our sidewalks. And the question then became, well, how? It's one thing to disprove or find flaws and say that this is broken. It's a whole other thing to be like, well, fix it. It's a whole other thing to learn from what was wrong and try to make it right. So we went back to the drawing board and came up with, well, what do we want to accomplish? What would we consider to be a successful investment strategy? And for us, it was this idea of being both equitable and impactful. And then we're like, okay, how can you be equitable and impactful? And we came up with this little slogan, which was, let's try to help the most people while simultaneously trying to help people that need it the most. Okay, it's a little bit of a tongue twister, so I'm going to say it again. Helping the most people while simultaneously helping people that need it the most. And by doing that, we really felt like we could create an investment strategy that would be both equitable and impactful. And so we went to our first step: where are people walking the most? And so, in order to do this, we worked with our local planning council, the MAPC, and utilized their local access score, which is a trip generation modeling, which utilizes census block data to the nearest schools, commercial zones, parks, and transit stops. And we took the top 20 percentile of these walk scores, and we kind of threw them out there, and then we manually kind of connected them together to create this high priority walk network. But we didn't finish there. We didn't just use this data and say next. We needed to engage with the community. We need to get the community's buy-in that this is what we're doing, this is how we're changing, help us. And so the first step we did is we went to every single neighborhood liaison. We took a snapshot of their specific neighborhood. We showed where we thought what the computer said the high walk networks were, and we told them, tell us we're wrong. Tell us that this needs to be modified, and how does it need to be modified? And I want to give a lot of credit to the MAPC local access score, because for the most part, they were like, wow, this is pretty good. But there were cases where, they were like, actually, kids cut through here to get to this ice cream shop, where, people, deviate from what, because human beings innately deviate from what they're supposed to do sometimes. And that's what we were trying to catch. And we did. And so after meeting with the neighborhood liaisons, the next step after that was meeting with the community. And I cannot give enough credit to the city for this. We went to every neighborhood meeting we could go to, city council meeting. We even started creating sidewalk fairs that, we went out there and tried to get people to come to us, and so we could explain this process and get their input. And, after iteration and iteration, we got to the point where we believed that we had the most important sidewalks, the most high priority sidewalks in each neighborhood. And, I can't emphasize how much the engagement mattered in this project, because buy-in and changing something that's been a process and policy for so long isn't easy. And you need to get everybody on board to make it be successful. And, when it came to this engagement, I think, when people were making requests, a lot of them were not understanding what the bigger picture was. And that's kind of a lack of transparency and not having enough exposure. And, once you explain when you reverse roles and you say, here, come into my shoes, and you have a $500 million of backlog and only $11 million, do you think, that little crack in front of your driveway, is the most important? And, human beings are innately good and will realize that, no, there's more important quarters that we should be fixing. And that was such a huge part of this project. And so once we had this idea of where people are walking the most, the next part was understanding where people need it the most. And for this, we utilized that same cumulative social vulnerability index that we had created, utilizing those 7 metrics and identifying, these locations of the highest need. And simply, all we did was put these two together. And by putting these two together, we were able to accomplish our goal of helping the most people while simultaneously helping people that need it the most. And when you look at these, this overlay, it was very easy for us to identify places that we had this overlap where we could accomplish our goal. And that's kind of where we focused. That was where we considered to be, our target zones to start this process to see where it goes. And what's interesting about, this strategy and this philosophy so far is that, at this point, we hadn't even looked at sidewalk conditions. And, as an asset manager, a lot of times what we do is we look at condition and let condition drive what we do. But sometimes, you can wait on that. You should look at other things before looking at conditions. So we got to this point, and then we looked at conditions. And then when we looked at conditions, these target zones, we noticed that there were a significant amount of sidewalks that were in poor and very poor condition, which again wasn't shocking to us based on what we had seen throughout this whole process. And so in order to really help us fine tune the impact that we would have on these repairs, we utilized building population density to really locate the corridors that would have the highest impact. And after that, once we found these projects that we believed in, we went for it. And for the last 4 years, the city has been investing heavily in doing accessible sidewalk work in all these target zones that we identified. And, not just patches, but creating, accessible pathways throughout these corridors. And this is, something that has become super successful. It's something that both the city, and Stantec is super proud of being a part of. And so I want to go over this. What has this project led to? And the first point I really want to talk about is this idea of getting the conversation started. And here you're going to see a little screenshot of an article that was in the Boston Globe where the city came out, and I can, again, not say enough good things about the city of Boston, where they came out and they acknowledged that we have an issue. And when it comes to engagement, they didn't hide it somewhere on their website and page 8 and some, they put it in the Boston Globe where everybody can read it, and they were willing to take it on the chin that, what we're doing necessarily wasn't the best thing. And I, again, can never say enough good things about it. And, the best part about this was, 5 days later, there was another little piece in the Boston Globe, and this time it was a cartoon. And I'm going to read this really quick because I think it's really important, and you can follow along in case I misread. But from the tiny brick appointed roadsides of its city center to its crumbling, obstacle-strewn concrete of its peripheral neighborhoods, Boston has, according to a new study, a sidewalk equity problem. Fixing the imbalance is a matter of fairness. After all, it's a sad day when a child can answer Shel Silverstein's classic riddle, where the sidewalks end. In Roxbury, I guess. It's ironic because Boston has long shown that sidewalks are more than merely byways. They're guides to our history, tools for pioneering new units of measurement, and blank slates for secret verse. We should heed the great urbanist Jane Jacobs, who describes sidewalk use as the true art form of the city. Citizens of all parts of Boston deserve pedestrian thoroughfares that are anything but pedestrian. And it was just absolutely incredible to see something like that, because when you think about where we started and where we were potentially just going to throw money at 311s and keep that process going, to where we went trying to figure everything out, to the point of getting the city on board, and everybody understanding where we were at as like a community, can't beat it. And the next step was, let's take this idea of sidewalks and take it to the next level, and think of more than just sidewalks. Let's think about taking this to every department, every asset. And so in 2018, the city applied for the Bloomberg Philanthropies Mayor's Challenge to bring equity to all street repairs, and they were crowned a champion city for this idea of utilizing this equity lens and this investment strategy to more than just sidewalks. And again, back to slide 1, working towards establishing trust with the city's most disenfranchised citizens. It really does go back to that first point, and I can't emphasize it enough how much this idea of trust matters. Because think of it this way: if we had thrown more money at the 311 program, would we not have widened that gap? Would we not have created more distrust by helping, instead of narrowing it? So yeah, I think that's really important. And so now I want to get to this point. Hopefully you are inspired and motivated, to start thinking about, your own communities, and, this idea of identifying inequity and becoming inclusive. And I want to say this, the purpose of this presentation, and I think Allison will agree, is really to inspire, is really to motivate, is really to get you to be that spark, right? There's that whole saying that when you ask a question in a room, there's somebody else that has the same question, and that kind of thing. I don't think this is much of any different. I think there are a lot of people that are doing things just because they've been done for generations, and they probably are thinking the same thing, like, well, is this the best thing that we should be doing? But it takes that spark, it takes that person who's willing to kind of, be the instigator of saying, hey, I don't think this is right based on these things, and making that effort, and trying to identify what that inequity is. And I want to say, no matter what your profession is, whether you're an architect, an urban designer, a civil engineer, an asset manager, the work you're doing is affecting a community in some degree, and there's definitely policy and practices that you are a part of that may be inequitable. And I don't want you to feel like, no matter what role you're into, if you're a junior engineer or a senior engineer, there's so many times where, I'll do something like a similar talk like this, and a junior engineer will come up to me and say, well, I don't know if I can speak up or anything like that, but our profession needs to wake up. We can't be zombies anymore. We really have to start thinking more critically and identifying inequities, and don't feel like just because you're, a younger engineer that you can't speak up about it. Okay, so paving the path, so you can do it too. This is the point. We want to give you this inspiration, and the first point is give yourself and your workplace an equity check. And what does that mean? And that means get to know your community and its needs. Everybody has different communities that have sorry, I'm getting a little bit. So everybody has sorry, I'm getting a little bit of lag here. Okay. Yeah, so give yourself and your workplace an equity check. So every community is going to be different. Every community isn't going to be like the city of Boston. So it's going to be important for you to do what we did kind of to some degrees, understand where the needs are of your community. And when it comes to the needs of your community, you also need to understand what the service qualities are and the biases you may have for these communities, right? And we're not just talking about sidewalks. We're talking about all kinds of assets. We're talking about crash clusters. We're talking about transit accessibility, transit safety, transit delays, bike accessibility, network infrastructure, all kinds of things. Don't just limit yourself to one thing. Assess everything that's going on in your community, everything that you have a part of, and see if you have this bias towards quality of services and any policies and practices that are contributing to it, similar to what we found. And assess the projects that you've done in the past. I feel like this isn't done enough. Become reflective of things that you've done differently and what you could do better. Reflect on the things that you've done and see if you should have had more community engagement or done anything any different. And next, this idea of gauging success is so important because we were going into this in the beginning, and what we consider success was just purely the number of requests that we were doing. And that really wasn't right. When we went through that impact, you saw we weren't being impactful at all because we had never thought about it. And, I know if, there's a lot of municipalities here and a lot of people are, underfunded, under-resourced, and always, in essence, almost forced to be reactive. And I think it's really important that, you take that step back, you take that bird's eye view and a more holistic view to understand what's going on and what you could be doing a little better from a proactive sense. And lastly, assess your funding. What are you funding and why are you funding it? Who are the people that are deciding where you do capital projects, and what are you taking into consideration in deciding these projects? And what is the impact of this work that you're doing? Again, the idea of understanding success and impact is very important. And does the staff that you have, do the department heads that you have the necessary data or tools to really fully understand this, to really select the right projects? So when we went from the idea of taking this just for sidewalks to all departments, we kind of had to create some tools that would help everybody kind of look at their city and their projects a little differently, and give them the ability to be like, we thought we wanted to do this project, but we didn't even know that there's a better project to do over here. And so it's really important in that sense to have that necessary data. We live in a world where we have unlimited data and technology at our fingertips. It's just be willing to make that jump. I'm now going to turn things over to Allison, who's going to talk about why engagement is so very important.
Thanks, Raman. Maybe. Oh, now I can fast forward. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag here, I think, because we're all in different spots. So sorry for that. Yeah, everything boils back to engagement, right? We keep at every point we're talking about this engagement. We're talking about trust with the community. We're talking about knowing the community. We're talking about embedding yourself in the community. As you start or ramp up equity work, you really need to think about how and why you're reaching out or communicating with your citizens. You know, most of us in our roles, whether we work for a state agency or a municipality, we have to engage the public at some point in time, sometimes because we are running whatever process and you have to have X number of public hearings at X points during the process. That's great. That's important. There's nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned public hearing that happens at City Hall or the administration building at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday or a Thursday. But that's not everything, right? We all talk about the usual suspects, right? Those are who you're going to get at those meetings. Those are the same people who are already engaged, already being served well. You know, ask yourself, when you're communicating with the public, are you reaching out to the community to truly hear from them and engage with them, or are you just doing it to check a box? Are you reaching the folks that you want to reach? Are you sure you're reaching the folks you want to be reaching? You know, remember the chart that Raman talked about at the beginning. Folks who receive lesser quality service from the government already trust the government and everyone involved with it less. If you don't trust the government, are you going to take the time out of your day to go out of your way and provide feedback or engage? Of course not. Like what? That's a waste of time. They don't care. They clearly don't care about me and my needs, so why would I bother? That's who you're dealing with. That's the reality, and they have every right and every reason to feel that way. We need to earn and build that trust. Those are the people we need to be working to reach. You know, we often work with communities and organizations that ask us why this group or that group didn't show up at the meeting. That's the wrong question. Before we can expect to get good engagement or involvement from groups that have historically had barriers to participation or straight up been not allowed to participate, these barriers could be anything. We need to develop a partnership, right? It could be a lack of trust in government. It could be your job hours, right? If you work from 3 to 11, you're never going to be able to make it to a 7 p.m. meeting. Maybe you don't have reliable childcare or reliable transportation or really anything else. There are 1,001 reasons to not participate in that meeting. We need to be doing the work to provide the opportunities at times and places that are convenient. You know, we can't go too in-depth today on engagement, but we wanted to touch on it because it's really just at the heart of equity in government. You know, maybe that'll be a future topic. It's something we do all day, every day, and is really important. As you come into these conversations, right, as you begin to start reaching out and engaging with spaces and communities you may not be familiar with, these are just a few of the many key points you need to keep in mind. You know, you need to do the work and repair. Learn the history, not just the general history, learn the details. Don't expect someone else to teach you. Don't always expect to be open with welcome arms right away. You need to build that relationship and earn people's trust. That's what we need to do, whether we're in the private sector, the public sector, working, you know, nonprofit agencies, you know, find the folks in the community that you can work with, build those relationships. Don't come in as if you have all the answers or think you know best. You know, yes, we're educated. Yes, this is what we do all day, every day. We have years of education experience. That's all true. At the end of the day, the idea you had or your solution may end up being the best one, but you can't come into that space acting as if you've already got that solution or that idea already thought up. Then people know, you know, the decision's already been made, right? People are the experts on their communities and their lives. Put that together with our knowledge and it'll never be matched, right? That's the perfect partnership we need. We need to build that trust and we need to listen actively and deeply. Listening is going to be your primary activity. Listen far more than you talk. I can't say it enough. Actively and deeply listen. Sometimes folks will need to get 100, 200 other things off their chest before they're ready to engage and talk about the topic you're there to talk about. Having open and ongoing opportunities for conversation and connection with the community does really help with that to get us to the heart of the issues more quickly. But you're not always going to be in that position, right? You need to build that trust and relationship first, meet people where they are, and then you'll be able to engage on all of the different topics. We all have biases. Be aware of them, understand them, learn more about them, and keep that in the front of your mind when you're engaging. Open up to past mistakes. Every community has them. If you can't think of at least a few things you or your community could have done better, you need to think some more. That's just the reality. I promise you they exist. We all make a million mistakes. That happens. We need to practice apologizing and owning up to these past failures. Yep, I'm going to call them failures. That's what they are, right? It only becomes a true failure if you don't learn from it. Even what may at the beginning appear to be the most epic of failures gives us all the opportunity to learn and grow. Take that opportunity. Be open with the public. Own up when it's happened. You know, if the city of Boston wasn't willing to recognize that their current policies and approaches just weren't working, we wouldn't have the case study to talk about today. A lot of the really great, most important and impactful work we've done would never have happened if we as professionals and public staff and officials weren't willing or able to recognize and admit our past mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we do better. You need to come into the space with an open mind, be prepared to change your approach, your thinking, your goals, your priorities, sometimes even on the fly in the middle of an event. You need to be able to meet people where they are. The last one is also really, it's not the last one. The last one on the slide. There are a billion things we all need to be doing as we come into these conversations, but as professionals, we need to recognize that we are all in positions of privilege. We have the stage and the opportunity to do more than we realize and we think, and we have the chance to advocate and change things. Using our privilege to amplify the voices of others is imperative. Bring what we hear out in the community or out on the street back to our meetings, to City Hall, back to the Department of Transportation, back to the DPW. Make sure that the folks who traditionally haven't been heard are heard. They won't always be in the room. They will not always be part of the conversation, right? We have a lot of different groups, different people engaging at different times on different things. Make sure we're amplifying the voices of people without the privilege that we have. As you want to learn more about this, we really hope you're excited and are taking this back to your work and are ready to ask, okay, but what can I do now? We're looking, keep learning. There are 1,000,001 things we can all learn and do. You can start right now. You can start reading, start thinking about your biases. We all have them. There's no embarrassment in admitting that you have biases. Learn about them, be aware of them, and work to dismantle them. We do like Project Implicit at Harvard. They have a number of implicit bias tests on all different topics that are really interesting, and I think they're kind of fun to take. There are lots of other ones, right? This is not the only one. This is the one we're most familiar with. Take the tests and learn more about your biases. There's an awful lot of inward and outward work we can each do to be identifying the ways we participate in oppressive systems. That's the reality, right? It's hard to hear, it's hard to say, but we all are involved in them every day. And we need to figure out how we're involved, and then we need to be working and figuring out how to change the systems. Learning the history, again, really important. It's not just the general history, but the detailed specific history of your community, its neighborhoods, its people, how they've changed over time, who lives there, who doesn't live there, and why and how that's happened. And again, amplifying, we cannot stress this one enough. We need to use our positions to amplify the voices of the less privileged. A lot of this comes from the Guide to Allyship. There are a lot of other great resources on the web as well. There's a Succinctum, we've worked with them a bit. It's really that program, and it's a strong program, but that's not the only one. So don't feel like what we're showing you today is the end all and the be all. It's also really important to learn the history of inequity. There are a million, just like I've said, there are a million of other resources in all kinds of forms that will help you learn the history. These are just a few of our favorite books. We could have filled the page and spent the whole hour talking about the books and the articles and the books, the articles, the movies, the podcasts we've all read and enjoyed and learned a lot from, but we just put a few. There are so many great ones. Read these, read other books, read articles, read websites. There are any number of organizations and websites and company efforts, everything devoted to equity education. Some have trainings you can take. Some are book groups or reading lists. Some even have videos if that's your jam and you'd rather sit down and watch something. Podcasts are a great source. Pick your favorite medium and learn as much as you can. Keep sharing, keep having these conversations, keep participating in these conversations, share them at work, at home, member of any organizations, just as much as you can have these conversations and engage folks. We're going to keep learning, and we are going to ask you to do the same. Working towards equity is a process of ongoing exploration and reflection. of what we all, personally and professionally, need to keep doing. We'll keep doing this work, and as we said, we really hope we've inspired you to incorporate equity into your everyday work. We appreciate your spending some time with us. Please put your comments in the chat box. We did receive a few questions prior, and we'll bring those into the discussion today. The first one is really quick. This is our first in a series, and we did not think about applying for AICP CM credits. That is a great idea. Maybe we'll do that next time, but for now, you can always self-report these hours on your CM log. So thank you, everybody, and we look forward to questions.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Rob and Dave. All right, we did get some questions in. So I'm going to read them and you guys can take them as you see fit.
Great.
Okay, so this one is in regard to the Social Vulnerability Index. And the question is, how did you define number 7, disability population?
You're muted, Raman. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. So we had worked with the Disability Commission, and the Climate Ready Boston data set had disability data in it, and that's how we utilized it. I know it's a tough metric to get, but we were lucky enough to have it accessible to us.
Thanks. Someone else says, thanks for presenting this great work. I'm curious, what was the length of time during which you were meeting with and discussing the data with community members and neighborhood liaisons for the Boston project?
It was 6 months to a year of us engaging. We went through multiple iterations. We we would change something, then go back and change something and go back. And, the time frames of the different events were kind of staggered too. So we wanted to make sure we got to as many events as we did. But yeah, 6 months to a year was the time that we spent really trying to engage and get as much input as we could when it came to the high priority network. So.
Thanks. Okay, next one. Have you looked at the applications of your approach to issues of municipal floodplain management?
I can start. Go ahead, Ron.
Go ahead. No, you go.
Yeah, that's work that's ongoing in a few different spaces where we do always bring equity and social vulnerability to those discussions.
Yeah, we did a few presentations in the city on this idea of resilience and bringing in climate resilience with social resilience and what that means. So we've done some work on it, but it's something that we're working on doing a better job of for sure.
Thanks. Okay, this is detailed. When you refer to an area of sidewalk percentage, is area referring to the total area of sidewalk inventory? Just wanted to confirm.
Okay, so for example, we had based on the GIS data we had the total sidewalk area of the block, and when we went out, we actually physically measured the amount of damage. So what we were able to quantify is the percent of the sidewalk that was damaged versus undamaged, and that's how we got to that score. So we have something called an SCI, which is our sidewalk condition index, and it's just a pure ratio of how undamaged the sidewalk is. So an SCI of 75 would be 25% damaged. So the idea of the categories is if more than half of the sidewalk is damaged or if it's in poor condition, the city will just come and replace the whole sidewalk because it's not worth chasing partial repairs for. But if you're in like that fair category, then you're at that boat of potentially being able to do something like that. So yeah, that's how we went out and got that data.
Okay, thank you. Here's the next one. What was the most rewarding part of community engagement equity work?
Oh, there's so much. I'm telling you, the best part for me was when you reverse roles, and people will start off being like, fix my sidewalk, and you put them in your shoes and you say, this is a situation the city's having, and then seeing that light bulb click and they're like, whoa, like I didn't realize that this is the situation the city's in, and this is what we should be doing. And getting the understanding that there is a greater good, there is there are people that are more negatively impacted than you are, and to understand that, and going to the places that were of need versus the places that had privilege was also different, where you're telling the people privileged, like, listen, there's people, it's an exposure thing, but there's people that have much worse conditioned sidewalks that need and rely on it more, that need the funding and help. And getting that understanding, it's amazing. And that's what I mean when I say people are innately good. They just need to be communicated with respectfully and with good intention, not, this is what we're doing, we're just here to check a box. Like Allison said, we're here, we want to get your help, but this is the issue the community is struggling with. This is why that Boston Globe cartoon was so amazing, is because it took everything that we were about and made it into, to the feeling of what the whole community needs to be about. And yeah, I can't, I'll go on for forever about that.
Yes, I would say the same thing. I mean, community outreach and engagement is just so rewarding, watching people go from skeptics, like, why you're here, why are you wasting my time? We do a lot of kind of pop-up or stay at the grocery store, go to the Boys and Girls Club, and watching people transition from that, skepticism to, damn, no, they're really here to listen. They want to know. Turning kids, I think one of the things that really stands out is I've been in any number of meetings. I always invite kids to meetings, right? That helps solve the childcare issue. Kids have great ideas. It's always a good time. And every once in a while, you get those teenagers that just really don't want to be there. And then by the end, they're engaging, having a good time. Really getting into and getting to know a community is absolutely just so worthwhile.
Amazing. Thank you. I think that's all we have time for questions now. We'll be sending up a follow-up email for other questions. And I want to thank Allison, Ramandeep for this amazing webinar. Such important work you're doing. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Ramandeep and Allison, and please stay tuned for the next series in our webinar, which will be in the fall. So thank you for participating and asking lots of great questions today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.